There's a gentleman called Dr. Paul Morland, a British demographer, who got celebrated a little bit amongst nationalist circles recently because he went on to GB News and described what was in store for British school children, how that white British primary school children were likely to become a minority, a declining minority, by about 2060. And I got a couple of emails and some messages from people who should know better, some quite uncompromising nationalists saying, this is a good sign, it shows we're winning, we're making progress, we're prevailing. I don't think that's the case at all. I think when you examine the reality and how Dr. Morland, I don't think, did address the reality, then I think it shows we're actually, and the fact that this got celebrated as well, shows that we're probably as far away as we've ever been from facing up to reality, or being capable of facing up to the reality that's ahead of us. Well, I want to begin by playing the relevant snip from this interview.
What decline are we looking at, and what kind of rate of acceleration are we looking at for, well, I suppose, what would you say, people demographically from, where is it? I don't know, sub-Saharan Africa, the Middle East?
Well, let's take those two questions separately.
Yeah.
So what's the speed of the decline and where are people coming from? In terms of the speed of the decline, there was work done by demographers at Oxford. There's been other work more recently that looks at 2060, where we'll have perhaps 50 to 60% of people defining themselves as white British. But of course, at that point, if you look at the primary school or the school-age folk or the people in the large cities, it would be a minority and a declining minority.
And that's by what year, we think?
That's by 2050, 2060.
So by 2050 or 2060, a relatively educated guess, or a very educated guess, as to what British primary schools will look like would have white British in the minority?
Yes, I would think so. And the country as a whole, a bare majority. Of course, there is...
That interview got some publicity amongst right-wing or nationalist circles because at least here's somebody talking about demographics, even if they're not talking about it accurately, and they should be. Now, this is the carry-home message that was reported in the Telegraph. White British children could be a minority in schools within 40 years. Dr. Paul Morland says people who identify as white British at primary school age or in large cities will be in a declining minority by 2060. So that's the headline, and it's wrong, or I think it's completely wrong. And the evidence, and I don't understand why this man, this professional leading demographer who's paid to do this all day long, got it wrong. I am not paid to do this. I am not a demographer. I have a day job, and God knows there's much else I can do in my spare time. And yet, I think I can get a more accurate figure. If you go to the government's census, the government does a school census. So on the last Thursday of every January, the schools have to submit numbers, data about the numbers in the school, including ethnic data. Every school has to do it. It's a big survey from grassroots level. Every school in the country supplies it to their county council, who supply it to the Department of Education, and they come up with this document. And all we have to do is Google for schools, pupils, and their characteristics, January or whichever year it is. The first one I want to look at is January 2019. Now, I did a video about this couple of years ago, birth rates in Britain and France. You can look at that. It scared some people a bit, but if I go down to, I think it's page 8, this document, it published, that school census was then poured over and written up in this report here that's downloadable as a PDF, or in 2019 it was, not in subsequent years. But in 2019, this is the last year that they provided the data in this PDF you can download and send to people, and which contains graphs, useful graphs. Now this one, ethnic group. So those pupils of all school age who have been classified according to their ethnic group and are of any origin other than white British. So that is minority ethnic. And what it shows here is, if I go down a tiny bit there, that graph goes from January 2006 to January 2019. So you see primary school children in January 2019, that was 33.5. In January 2006, it was about 20.5. So look at that very straight line. Over 13 years, it went up 13% over a straight line. That is 1% per year. That is a caricature of an established steady trend. The cliche amongst data gatherers is you shouldn't look for straight lines in a curved universe, because things accelerate, they fall off. Even when they're decelerating, they're still rising, but basically you so seldom get a straight line graph like that. That's why I call it a caricature of an established trend, a straight line graph. 1% a year, it's going up. Now that got some attention, got a bit of attention from me, got a bit of attention from other people, not very loud. I don't have many viewers, I can't put it down to me, but I wonder if the Department for Education got the wind up. Because of that, they put out that information, people had gathered it and said things are going wrong, things are getting too multicultural around here. And so the next year, they didn't publish it they changed the format. I always get suspicious when government bodies change the format of information they release, because it's probably a cover for changing thresholds or changing their counting methods for PR needs. Because the people who boss them about, they don't care about education, they care about what you think they are doing for education. So the PR buffer between the politicians and these people, that will be all important. That will be the efficient bit, not the education bit. And that is, they in the next year, in January 2020, they published the same data. And if you go down to I'll expand on the ethnicity tab, and what it found for minority ethnic background, primary schools was 33.9% of pupils. That's up from 33.5%. So whereas for the previous 13 years, even with a ramping up and increasing immigration rate, in January 2020, it only went up 0.4% for primary school pupils, although for secondary school pupils, it went up a whole percent, from 31.3 to 32.3. I wonder what was going on there. Maybe that's a COVID glitch, although I don't think the lockdown meat grinder had really started by January, or probably it wasn't going full blast by January 2020, but maybe put that down to COVID. And the reason I say maybe put that down to COVID is the next year, January 2021, again, the new format, you can't really email the report to people, there are no graphs. So if I click on the ethnicity tab there, what it says there is primary school children, 33.9, unchanged from the previous year, from January 2020. So from January 2020 to January 2021, there was no change in the numbers in primary schools. And secondary schools, it actually went down from 0.1%. I suspect that was that probably would have been because of lockdown, difficulty gathering the figures, probably a lot of foreigner families kept their children away from school. Foreigner families seem to have a difficult time adapting to COVID. If you remember seeing at the time, that was all a bit more white guilt that we should feel for some reason or other. Anyway, so that may be a COVID glitch. And I suspect I'm supported by that in what happened next year. In January 2022, the figures were released, and then if I go it down again, click on the ethnicity tab, what you see is then it's back up to the 1% a year trend line. So it went from 33.9 to 34.8 and in primary schools, and in secondary schools the number of non-white British went from 33.1 to 34.1. So that's back on the 1% per year trend, growth in percentage of non-white British children in schools. So about 18 months ago, January 2022, the 34.8, basically 35% of primary school children were non-white British. Now the figures for January 2023, they haven't been released yet. They're due to be released in about a month's time. I might do a video about them then. I wonder if they'll be a bit higher than 1% this time, partly to because the pupils that weren't at school during lockdown, so didn't get counted during lockdown, they might be back in school now and getting counted again. Also because the mass immigration trend is just hitting the ceiling. So as I'll show you in a minute. So I would expect it to be a bit more than 1% next year. Maybe they'll massage the figures though. I don't entirely trust these numbers, but I think these government has every incentive to underplay these numbers. But we can say that it's 35% in nearly 18 months ago in January 2022. And so if I go back here to this diagram from 2019, because it's the only one that has that table, that graph. If you extend that out further, now 1% per year from, let me just switch that off. 1% per year from January 2022. You need another 15 years to get from 35 to 50%. So 15 years from January 2022 is January 2037. Now that is not 2060 as this fella implied here, as the headline, the takeaway headline figure from this guy, Dr. Paul Morland. That is, sorry if I show you that again. Hold on. That fellow, Dr. Paul Morland, the headline figure there, that is, the headline figure is that primary schools will be majority non-white British by 2060. No. If the figure is about almost 1/3 of that figure. It will be 13 and a half years away, assuming that line doesn't increase, which I think it will. I think the rate of increase will be faster than it has been, but it is not going to be. So 2022 to 2060. I think that's about 37 years. It won't be that. It'll be 13 and a half years. So why is he so far out now? This is where there are two things that I find depressing. One is why this man didn't spell it out the way I think it is, given that he's a full-time paid demographer. The second is why the rest of us, those of us on the right on this issue, why are we celebrating what's been said? What does that say about us? Okay, now let me go to this fella, Dr. Paul Morland. Dr. Paul Morland is an author and broadcaster who writes and speaks about population and the big demographic trends across the world. Okay, so the big demographic trends. I can't think of a bigger demographic trend in the last 1500 years than what is going on now. It is fit to be called an invasion, a managed invasion being managed by our political authorities. It is as big or possibly a bigger demographic issue than the influx of Saxons, Angles and Jutes in after the Romans left in 410. So in the 400s, so basically 1500, 1600 years since then, I don't think we've had as big a demographic trend. He should be all over this like a rash. This is what he says he does. This is his website, okay, Paul Morland, and the About tab, and he also he describes himself, or he talks about himself there. This is him talking about himself, described as the UK's leading demographer, Scottish Herald. I think that's him saying the Scottish Herald says this about me, and I agree. And one of the world's preeminent demographers, Mercury. Again, I think he's saying Mercury said that about me, and I agree. He's written books and he's appeared he's written for the Financial Times, the Sunday Times, the Telegraph, the Toronto Globe and Mail, Der Spiegel, the Jerusalem Post and BBC Radio 4. And he goes on to say he has been an Associate Research Fellow at Birkbeck University of London and a Senior Member of St Antony's College, Oxford. Now, I don't know if that gives him tenure, but I think it gives him, well, certainly this gives him a successful, lucrative career. And also, I think it gives him the right to talk openly without getting fired. It would surprise me if an associate research fellow at Birkbeck University who's doing research doesn't have some kind of tenure where he can speak out. And certainly I don't think he would get fired for just saying, well, these are the government figures. If this straight line trend continues for another 13 years, as it has for the last 13 years, then primary school children will be white British primary school children will be in a minority by 2037. So I don't know why he hasn't said it. I don't think you can say it's because he's an untutored ignoramus. He clearly isn't. He's highly educated. He's paid to focus on this issue. There are a lot of smarter people than me who brief him, who get him to write articles, who get him to appear on TV. So I don't think you can say he just doesn't know. He doesn't know that the Department for Education have a school census every January. He doesn't know that those figures exist. I don't think you can say he's worried he'll get fired, because how could he get fired for talking about the government's own figures and saying what they project? And particularly if he is a well-entrenched academic, which he appears to claim to be. It is quite, and I think this is a relevant question. What motivates him not to? I don't think he talked straight during that interview. Is it because he thinks British government figures are a pile of garbage, and he's done a school census of his own, or he knows of a better school census? I find that pretty unlikely, because I don't think anyone who's not authorised by the Department for Education would be allowed, even if they had the time and money, to do a full school census. And it's a pretty, as I say, it's a grassroots school census. So I find it unlikely that he's got a school census of his own that teaches him that government figures, those government figures that are published there, are useless. So again, what is it? What motivates that? I don't know. This is the first time I've ever heard of him. I'd never heard of him before. I know nothing else about him. I'm not psychic. I can't read his mind. I don't know what his motives are. It is not 2060. It is not 2050. I think it is, by the government trends, it is 2037. But I think it will probably be faster than that. The reason I think it will be faster than that is because mass migration is ramping up. It is at huge record levels we never would have thought possible. Let me give you the figures here. Long-term international migration provisional. So these are provisional figures, year ending June 2022. And I want to show you two graphs here. It's quite a long. Again, now this one is long-term migration in the year ending June 2022, was largely driven by non-EU nationals. So that's basically saying not non-white people, and that the migration to Britain there was, hold on, long-term migration was a bit under 1.1 million. That's by the government's own figures, and you see there that non-EU long-term migration, so not short stay or holiday or visiting people, that was 704,000. Now, but also the staggering numbers, that's one point, but notice the direction of that curve. It is going up and up and up and accelerating. I think that will be more later. I mean, the Telegraph, who reported this, they have a little graph there, and they show the numbers there. It's 500,000 net. Yeah, net migration figures. What they mean, that means if 10 million sub-Saharan Africans come in and 9,999,000 white British leave, the British government will say, great, there's no change, it's just 1,000 net immigration. That's what net migration means. That's why they use that number. It conceals the reality. But that, what that shows is 500,000 net migration, but it shows the projected figure. Now, it says that the source is the Office for National Statistics, and I assume that is where the estimate comes from of net migration going up to 1 million within, it looks like within about a year. Next year it's going to be about 1 million, according to what the Telegraph is reporting. Though I don't know if that came from, I assume that came from the Office for National Statistics. And so if we go back here, I want to show you another table simply for visas issued, and bear with me whilst I find it. Now, what this graph seems to show is estimates of non-EU immigration. And what the number there is about 1.2 million. And that is long-term. That is long-term non-EU migration. That's the number they're giving. I don't understand how they get that back down to 704,000 for non-EU migration in the chart I just showed you, because I think the number of non-EU migrants who left in that year was 200,000. So, but that, so you can take that number. Personally, I think that's likely to be the realistic number. You can take it with a pinch of salt. What I want to show is the rapid increase in those numbers. So over 2 years, that number has gone from 400,000 to 1.2 million, trebling over 2 years. That number is hitting the ceiling, and if anything, it's accelerating. It'll be more next year. God knows what it'll be. Will it be 1.5 million next year? Who knows? So with those figures, now this I am not a demographer, but if I can work this out, I think that this man, Dr. Paul Morland, should have been able to work it out. And if I think that this trend here, that graph there, I think that 1% growth in non-white British primary school children is going to accelerate. If it accelerates, then we will hit the majority non-white British in primary schools before 2037. It could be, I reckon it could easily, given the numbers in that migration graph, I think that we could easily hit the figure of, or a majority of British primary school children being non-white British. I think we could easily hit that by 2035. Maybe a miracle will happen, and that accelerating curve, migration curve that's hitting the ceiling, will come down again. I doubt it. Now, what I find, so the first thing I find I'm very wary of is, why did Dr. Paul Morland not spell out those figures there? Because I think the school census, that's the starting place for what he was saying. He must have that knowledge at his fingertips, and that is part of big demographic trends, if anything is. I don't know why. So I'm very, very wary of that. He might have good reasons. He might know, I'm sure he knows an awful lot that I don't know. He might know something that I don't know on this point. If he wants to come back and argue with me, I'd be very flattered. I'm sure he won't. I'd be astonished if he does. Now, the other thing is that people on our side, on my side, were greeting what he said with such enthusiasm. What a victory this is. This shows we're winning. I don't think it shows anything of the sort, including people on our side who claim to be real number crunchers, data gatherers, good at doing the maths, working spreadsheets. But no, this instead, what people are saying is just the fact that he's talking about it. I don't think that's a sign that we're winning. I think that's a sign that we are losing, and we feel desperate because we'll clutch at any mention of demographics. Because if you say to a lot of people, this or that bad thing may happen by 2060, a lot of people will say, well, I might be dead by then, and a lot can happen. Nothing stays the same, everything changes, and it probably won't happen. If you say to them it might happen in this bad thing might happen in 12 years' time, people might sit up and take notice, and they'll think, well, what about my retirement? What does that mean for my children or my grandchildren? People will notice. And I don't think this statement by this gentleman is something to celebrate. The fact that we are celebrating it enhances my view that we are not yet anywhere near being in a fit state to face up to the ugly reality. And it also enhances my view that we're not going to reform our way out of this demographic. I think a managed demographic invasion, really pushed at full blast by our politicians for power, in order to gain more power by weakening us, dividing us, grinding us down, taking away our sense of home and identity. And that managed invasion is, we are not going to legislate our way out of it. We're not going to politic our way out of it. We are going to collapse our way out of it. And then when the system collapses for economic reasons, then I think we will put in place a better system, one, independent of the state, because the state would have broken down and won't be able to get up again. And then I think we will then separate out along ethnic lines. And that way, I think we will roll back the tide of this invasion then. But what I'm saying here is not to say that I think we will win, but I think it won't happen under the current system, won't happen under the current structure. It won't happen because we reform our way out of it, won't happen because we legislate our way out of it. The thing that will need to happen first, and that I think will happen first, is that the system will collapse. And then I think we will face the issue directly. Thank you.